There are some moments in life where the world explains itself to you. Things are so obvious and somebody says exactly what they mean to you, and a door will close loudly enough so that you can pretend that the door did it. A truth may land so clearly in your life that even if you tried to deny it, it would feel so ridiculous to do so. Those moments are so easy to live inside of. Those moments are so easy to adapt to. They don't require much, if anything, from you at all. You react, again, you adapt, and you move on from those moments. Most of life happens in spaces where nothing is confirmed. No one states the truth plainly, and situations stretch on and on in this grey area, where everything feels slightly off to you, but nothing is explicit enough for you to justify any sort of action to fix it. You keep waiting for the world to reveal its master plan and what it is doing to you, and to give you a clear signal or a sign in a decisive moment, and something that says to you, now you can see it, therefore now you can respond. And sometimes that moment will never come. As a matter of fact, most of the time that moment will never come. And that's when something strange, a unique feeling starts to happen. And it's not outside of you, but instead it's what's inside. When the world refuses to show its hand, you start relying on something completely different. You start relying on something quieter and something that doesn't come from any sort of explanation or any sort of consensus. Instead, what you do is you start noticing. You start noticing the pauses in conversations, and you start noticing the way someone's tone shifts when they mention someone's certain name, the way an energy in an entire room can subtly change just when one person enters or just when one person leaves, the way your own body tightens in certain situations without being able to explain why. Just instinctually, these things happen. And slowly you come to the realization that clarity does not always arrive because the world announces it. Sometimes it arrives because the world refuses to announce it. I see clearly when the world doesn't show it to me, is the title of this video, I presume. I hope it should be. At first, that title, you may have read it and it might have sounded arrogant. It might have been like, okay, this guy thinks he's better. He thinks he can see better than what the world is showing to him. It's as if I'm claiming some sort of special perception that you don't have access to. But what it isn't is arrogance. What it is adaptation. It is what happens when you realize that waiting for everything to be explained and waiting for the world to justify all of its issues and problems will keep you confused for so much longer than it is necessary. It'll keep you confused and dazed to the point where you cannot make your own progress and you cannot tie your own knots. You can't do anything on your own. The world often performs some sort of clarity instead of actually offering it to you. The world is performative, it shows off this scene where everything is clear and you can understand everything. But in reality, when you break down those scenes, there's nothing clear about them. There is no clarity. There is no understanding or comprehension from anyone in those scenes. There's, explanations that sound complete, but they're still hollow. They feel so hollow. There's reassurances that should actually calm you, but instead what they do is they leave you more uneasy. They leave you more confused than if you had never heard the reassurance. There are narratives that tie events together neatly, but never actually match the quiet signals that you yourself have actually picked up if you didn't listen to just the narratives. And when that happens, when you come to this conclusion that, sometimes you can see the world better than the world can show itself to you, you are faced with a strange, it's a first-hand, you've never experienced it before, choice. You can either trust the explanation because it's easier, it makes your life easier, and it's official, it's something that you can understand, it's something that everyone else is repeating to you, or you can trust the little voice in the back of your head, the uncomfortable recognition inside you that says something here is not aligned, there's something wrong with here, there's some misdirection that's being proven to me here. Most people will choose the explanation, and that's just the world we live in. And it's not because they are naive, but instead because it's just exhausting for them to question absolutely everything in their life. It is socially expensive to act on perceptions that others cannot see yet. There's a quote by, I think it's Friedrich Nietzsche. He says that those who are dancing look crazy to those who cannot hear the music. That is exactly what's happening here. It's so much easier to stay inside that shared story, the story that everyone else has comprehension to, even if something inside you quietly disagrees with it. But the longer you ignore those quiet recognitions, and the longer you silence them and put them to the back of your head and try and ignore that music playing in your head, the louder they become. they start to grow exponentially in your mind. They start to make you seem crazy because you cannot accept your own truths, nor can you accept the societal truth. And due to that, you start replaying moments in your mind. There's little things that you didn't add up at the time, but now that you're thinking about it, it's, maybe that's kind of weird for you to understand. It's expressions that changed way too quickly around you, and words that carried slightly different meanings than what was actually spoken to you. And then you come to the conclusion that the information has all been there the whole time. It just wasn't packaged in a way that made it obvious to you. It wasn't packaged in a way that you're used to, where the world tells you everything that you need to understand instead of hyperanalyzing anything. Clarity rarely arrives as a declaration. More than often, as in almost every time in my opinion, it arrives as an accumulation, as a comprehension of things that have happened over time, as this being this being that, but this not being that, this emotion being this emotion, but then some people use this emotion to come off of this, it's just understanding that different things have different meanings, and then hyper-analyzing these certain things between conversations, the body language, things like that. There's patterns and there's repetition and there's a slow gathering of details that, individually each detail means nothing. Just because they shook their hand, or because they didn't squeeze your hand hard enough when they shook your hand, doesn't actually mean anything. They mean nothing individually, but collectively, when you add things together, they say everything. The problem with that is that patterns require patience. Patterns require you to sit with some sort of uncertainty and some sort of craziness in your mind for much, much longer than most people are comfortable with. And that is why clarity born in silence often feels like a lonely feeling. When the world doesn't show something to you openly, everyone else moves and continues on as if nothing is wrong. Conversations continue normally, and decisions get made as if the surface versions of events are the real versions. Therefore, you are the one left holding a quiet awareness that has not become a public reality. And then you begin to doubt yourself. And then maybe you start to say things to yourself, such as, I'm reading too much into things. Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe the discomfort I'm feeling is just anxiety looking for something to attach itself to. And those are reasonable questions to ask yourself when everyone else has a different opinion to you. Anyone who sees patterns early has to ask themselves that, because obviously you cannot just start going crazy and labeling things and then not think to yourself, that you're not reading too much into things. But sometimes, and when this happens, it is the most important, and it's the key factor to it all. The pattern starts to repeat itself, and eventually the moment arrives where the world does actually reveal itself, where the pattern reveals itself as what it is. The truth becomes undeniable, and somebody says what they've been avoiding, and an event happens that exposes absolutely everything that had been hinted at before, and suddenly the clarity is now public. Every single person sees it now. And when that happens, the strange feeling it's not triumph in your mind. It's not that you feel proud that you saw it earlier than everyone else. You feel something quieter in your mind, and it's heavier as a matter of fact, because you realize that clarity did not suddenly appear in anyone else's mind. It had been forming quietly the entire time. And now the only difference is that the world has caught up to what your instincts already understood. And that's when you begin to respect a different kind of vision, a different kind of sight or perception. And what it is not the dramatic, and it's not the obvious clarity that arrives with headlines and news headlines and declarations and everyone telling you this and that, but instead it's that the quiet clarity that grows underneath the surface of the ordinary moments. It's the kind that asks you to pay attention to absolutely everything, even when nothing seems dramatic enough to justify paying attention to it. Seeing clearly when the world doesn't show you anything doesn't mean that you have to act quickly instantly. Instead, sometimes it just means that you have to hold the awareness without forcing it into a conclusion too quickly. You watch and you listen and you comprehend and you put together your evidence and you make your own argument, and then you let the pattern reveal itself before you move. But this also means that you stop demanding a spectacle from the world before you trust what you feel. The world loves a spectacle, it highlights the loud betrayals, it highlights the public victories and the dramatic endings. Those are so easy to recognize because they come with noise, but most of the important shifts in your entire life don't arrive with any noise. Instead, what they arrive is with habits and subtlety, and they arrive over time. A friendship cools off and a relationship cools off long before it actually ends. A career path quietly loses its meaning so much longer before you actually resign or before you change job. Relationships change shape months before anyone actually admits it out loud. And the signals appear so much earlier than you actually expect, but they appear so softly that most people don't pick them up. So if you train yourself to only respond to what is obvious, then you'll always be late to those moments because you'll only be responding to the final, the outburst, the final decision. You'll stay in those situations much longer than you actually have to, and you'll search for proof much longer after the recognition has already happened inside of you. And eventually you will begin to realize something, and that something is that clarity does not belong to the world. Clarity belongs to attention. The world may show it to you, or it may not. It's up to the world to do that. It may disguise it with things like explanations or distractions or narratives that feel convincing on the surface. Or the issue with that is that attention cuts through those things quietly. So once you start paying attention, you notice what persists. You notice what quite doesn't fit with the world. And that kind of clarity is not it's not an explosion. It's not an outburst. It doesn't demand any sort of validation or acceptance from you. What it does is simply sit there waiting for you to acknowledge it and waiting for you to accumulate the truth. Again, I'm going to say the title. I see clearly when the world doesn't show it to me. And it isn't because the world is trying to deceive me. Often the world isn't, often the world actually is helping you. Sometimes the world simply just doesn't know how to articulate what is happening yet. And people are so confused about their own motives, and situations are still unfolding, and the truth is still forming. So when you use your own eyes and you use your own comprehension skills to form an opinion, that is when the opinion becomes real to you. Attention, again, doesn't wait for any final explanation. It reads the direction that things are moving in. And once you start trusting that and moving in that direction, life changes slightly. It's very subtly it changes. And you stop needing everything from everyone to be spelled out directly in front of you before you adjust your direction with the motion of the waves. You don't require any sort of dramatic confirmation before you step away from something that feels wrong. You don't need that final chapter of the story before you understand where the story is heading. You begin to move earlier, and you begin to move quietly, and you begin to move more intentionally. That is the biggest key to it. You have to move with intention with everything you do. And it isn't because you know everything. It's not because you know that this is going to happen and you know that this is going to end that way. But instead, because you finally learned after watching this fucking shit long video that clarity often appears much longer before the world decides to display it to you.